Thank you very much. In the short time that I have, I just want to focus on the Pacific as one of the emerging markets. Certainly in terms of volume, it's not large, but as I pointed out yesterday, when the industry is being squeezed in Australia and New Zealand, at least in this part of the world, they're targeting the small islands of the South Pacific. And I made mention yesterday, of course, that many of the islands just don't have the capacity, the regulatory policy frameworks to counter some of this work. So, as I say, in the short time that I have, I'll just focus on the Pacific. You will have seen this slide yesterday. These are all the islands of the Pacific region. The tobacco use in people between the ages of 25 and 64. And I can't see it very well, but you should be able to see that on the left, the islands with the use of tobacco exceeding 70%, 80% in Kiribati. There is in some of the islands, particularly women in Vanuatu, they don't smoke at all, and in fact the prevalence of smoking in Vanuatu is less than 5%. And if we knew what that's about, perhaps we can use some of that to influence many of the other islands. But as you can see in this graph, there's very high levels of smoking in adults. And most of all, it's not declining. It's not coming down at all. If anything, the uptake of smoking by young people continues to increase, certainly compared to Australia and New Zealand, where smoking is coming down. It's not happening in our region. And some of the tactics that were prevalent in New Zealand and others many years ago are still being used in the Pacific. There's still single sales of cigarettes in the marketplace in the Solomon Islands, despite their endorsement of FCTC. The other unknown for us, of course, is some reliable figures on smoking in young people. There's some data around to suggest that young people are picking up smoking, particularly girls, but we don't have good enough information on tobacco use in young people in the small islands of the Pacific. Almost all of the islands were part of the FCTC process, and many of them have legislation that had been triggered by the FCTC, but many of them are now lingering, I understand. Some not quite through parliaments, and some are completed laws. But as I made mention yesterday, enforcement is a problem. And for us in the region, we have to think creatively about how we might enforce the laws and inform populations, because the traditional approaches have not worked for us. In most islands, there are no organized cessation support. I am aware, of course, that most people who give up go cold turkey. But the smoking patterns in the region are such that people continue to smoke, and there are no organized or support services available for people to give up smoking. Again, as I made mention yesterday, the industry is very active in the small islands of the Pacific, trying to counter the effects of those of us who try to protect children and reduce smoking in the populations around the region. The other thing that happens, of course, is that ministers of health readily sign up to a multitude of regional and global declarations. We have a lot of them in the region, declaration on pretty much everything, but somehow we don't enforce them, and there appears to be the main issue for us. How do we help small island nations with limited capacity and capability to honor and to put into effect the declarations that they have signed up to? In 2013, the ministers of health from around the region signed up to the Tobacco Free Pacific 2025, But again, it's one of those things that's there, but there's no active program to try to make happen the objectives of the tobacco-free goal. Yesterday I also made mention of the Pacific NCD roadmap that was endorsed by both the Ministers of Finance and Ministers of Health, which is the main policy instrument that we are putting into effect in the region. And it appears to be getting some traction. So this is some figures we got as of December last year. The tax rates in some of the islands in the Pacific, many of them, of course, are approaching the recommendation from the WHO report around in the Cook Islands. It's at least 74%. I understand that it's higher now, and Palau. Palau is a small island in the north, and they've done some good work. The increase in taxes, of course, hasn't translated into a reduction in smoking, as I mentioned at the beginning. And the question for us is, what else do we need to do to give effect and to support the small islands in their efforts to reduce smoking in the islands? I do think the policy instruments are there, but we need to somehow think of ways in which we might support them to take the next step. So just to finish off, smoking, as you will have seen from the first graph, remains very high in the islands. I have the suspicion that the threshold for the anti-social status of smoking hasn't been reached in many of the small islands, that people still pretty much tolerate smoking, unlike what's happened in New Zealand, Australia, and elsewhere, of course. And I do think until that time, it's difficult to push ahead if the communities tolerate smoking and smokers and smoking. The Framework Convention, no doubt, has encouraged preventive action, legislative, regulatory activities in the islands, but I am not sure that we are continuing to make the kind of gains that we expect. There's no doubt that the Tobacco-Free Pacific 2025 is a noble ambition, but I think we need to do quite a lot of work to make that happen. I think the Pacific NCD roadmap is probably one of those instruments. And just finally, I do think Australia and New Zealand organizations really need to continue to support us in countering the effects of the tobacco industry in the Pacific Islands. Thank you very much.